Yeah, so I have deja vu from last year when the first M1 came out. I felt a little bit conflicted about actually buying a MacBook for the first time in my entire life, and here we are once again. And I have the same feelings, but for different reasons, and I will explain why as well. I'm going to be one of your many unboxings that you're probably watching on this here laptop. In any case, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here's an unboxing of the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14. All right, so one thing to really note about the model that I am unboxing right now is that it is the M1 Pro. Personally, I don't think I even needed the M1 Max. That's the reason why I didn't even bother to try and get that model. But in this case, comes with 1TB SSD. Definitely need a little bit more storage. If I learned anything from the previous MacBook Pro, I just realized I didn't need my knife. There's always a tab. I have to remember that about Apple devices. They always come with a tab on the box. I should remember that. But hey, you gotta look at my cool knife. Anyway, back to what I was saying. I went for this MacBook mainly because I was trying to make sure that I wasn't spending too much. See, one of the reasons why the MacBook Pro 13 M1 from last year ended up being a purchase that I was happy to make was because despite the spec sheet on paper sounding really oddly like low end, the M1 actually proved to be the most efficient processor in a laptop that I had used at the time. And because those specs were actually quite low, it meant that the laptop was kind of wildly affordable compared to MacBooks I've ever seen in the past. So fast forward to now, and I really did not expect to want this MacBook Pro, especially with the updated M1 processors, because the prices were like kind of outrageous. These are the MacBooks though that seem to have like the real Pro moniker, actually really making it clear that these are Pro tools, and because of that, they're actually adding a lot of features back into these laptops that people were waiting for to come back for the longest time. Also, I didn't mention this when I was just handling the box before I got to the laptop itself. This is a heavy thing. Like, this is much heavier than the Pro 13 ever was. There are already some differences here, much more utilitarian in its design language with these like rubber bottom, or rather, that just feels like straight up plastic, but these new risers that are on the bottom obviously says MacBook Pro, making it very clear, Pro model. Of course, the top portion, this is the classic MacBook, and you know what, as I just hold the MacBook Pro, this is the 14-inch by the way, not even the 16-inch, definitely feels super hefty. But then of course we have the large power adapter, USB-C to MagSafe in this case, and that's going to be one of the big stories for many people out there who are returning to the MacBook Pros with all of the ports that are returning, including a MagSafe port. All right, and speaking of the MagSafe cable, here it is. Has a pretty nice usable length to it. It's not going to be too short as to like tether me too close to a wall, I feel like. You know what, I will say, this is a big deal for me, because back when I used to say MacBooks are a little bit too expensive for somebody like me, it's not something I'm ever going to really buy into, it was when the charging ports looked like this. And here I am, MagSafe in hand. Yeah, all of my friends from college are looking at me now like, look at you with the MacBook Pros now. Actually, I did want to come back to this portion of the unboxing because I wanted to sort of fish out black Apple stickers. I'm not gonna lie, knowing all of the different devices that I have worked with from Apple over the last like few weeks, it's kind of nice to see something different. This is literally something different. Black Apple stickers. Just had to point those out. Okay, as I tried to pick up the laptop, I already noticed the slightly different shape when it comes to this. It's not as sharp as the other MacBooks. This brings back that more rounded corner, the more rounded edges and whatnot. The best way for me to describe it, if I keep going back to like my blasts from the past, back when I was in college, they had, this was before aluminum became like the mainstay for all MacBooks. There were those plastic cover MacBooks. It's more or less that shape. Only now, since it's all metal, it's definitely heftier and there's a lot of power underneath. It is true, as a couple of people have already said in their reviews, that clearly these MacBook Pros of the 14 and 16-inch varieties are definitely tools. These are the devices that you get when you really want to work on something specific. And for somebody like me, that's going to be photo, video editing, script writing, all of that stuff. And if I'm completely honest, the MacBook Pro 13 that I had gifted to Isa, and she actually traded it in for her own 14-inch laptop. What happened was with that laptop, even at 8 gigs of RAM, the base model, the only part that really hurt was the low amount of storage. I thought that that laptop was actually doing a perfectly fine job. I was able to put DaVinci Resolve on there, and while there might be a couple of frame drops when scrubbing through the timeline, for the most part, I was getting the same work done for almost the same amount of time, and all on battery. That was the biggest part. I was able to get all of it done without having to have the laptop plugged in like pretty much every PC that I have worked with discrete graphics. So knowing that these new processors, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, were coming out with more cores, more GPU and CPU power, hopefully the same efficiency as far as battery life is concerned, it really intrigued me. But then you see the prices, and it's clear that while, peers like Jaime Rivera would say that the M1 actually blew out of the water the fully spec'd out Intel-based MacBook Pro 16 that he already had, and for a very big fraction of the price, it seems to me that these MacBook Pros sort of just went ahead and filled those gaps. So that kind of disheartened me a little bit, that if I was going to get a MacBook that had specifications I really wanted, all of a sudden, once again, we are back to a place where you have to spend all that money for it. But then I saw, and this is going to be a big shout out to a fellow YouTube creator, Max Yuriev. I saw his video in the dead of night, the night before these laptops were going to arrive in stores or in the hands of people like Isa, who pre-ordered it. And I watched his video basically reminding me that remember that the original M1 laptops actually did way more than enough, or even just enough, for most people who might be on YouTube, people like me that you're watching right now. So it's with that in mind that compared to many of my peers, I just went ahead and got an M1 Pro, not an M1 Max. I did get what you could call the higher end base model, basically the one that has all of the cores enabled, 10 core CPU, 16 core GPU, but the main thing here is that I decided not to go for the higher RAM. This is 16 gigabytes of RAM, not 32, and I did go for the 1 terabyte of SSD, but that's part of the higher end base model anyway. So I don't know, maybe the main thing I'm trying to do is just justify my purchase here. I still think that this laptop, even at the very base models, is definitely supposed to signify a big step above what the MacBook Pro 13s were introducing last year. Literally the various ports that everyone was looking for, and not just ports, you get the SD card slot here. And of course on the other side, we have a couple more USB-C ports which can be used for charging, which is nice, yet for most people, you're probably just going to default to the good old returning. If I could just get it. Hold on. There you go. You might just come right back to the MagSafe. But anyway, that should pretty much do it for this unboxing experience. I just wanted to kind of get this thing set up and talk through my thoughts as I went through the setup here. And like you can see here, I'm already into Mac OS, and I am going to start messing around with this laptop. I will be back tomorrow to give you some of my first impressions and thoughts. Okay, it might be more than 24 hours since I actually unboxed the MacBook Pro 14, but let's just say the morning after something happened, and my mind was elsewhere. But after using this for a little while, getting my application set up, and actually enjoying a little bit of media on the MacBook Pro 14, I have to say, this is definitely an upgrade from the original MacBook Pro 13. With the 13-inch model, which is going to be traded in, so I still have it, there are just some tropes about that laptop that are, at this point, kind of antiquated. And while you might argue that Apple's kind of going backwards by reintroducing certain features that we all really wanted, you still can't deny that having those features is a huge plus now. I never really hated the touch bar, but for the things that I was using it for, like mainly brightness and volume, it's much better to have everything else be tactile so that you know exactly what you're pressing and you don't have to go through like little menus or little things on the touch bar in order to get there. This keyboard is also quite nice. There's a tiny bit of springiness to all of the keys, and if you're very sensitive to like the way your keyboards feel, you might notice it. Also, I like the contrasty look of the all-black keyboard compared to the space gray body. And that fingerprint reader on the top corner, that little circle that's there in it, I do kind of like that being there because it is a obvious target for your index finger or whatever the case may be. Now, in terms of the notch, you might have noticed that I kind of poked a little bit of fun at it. It was less me actually being super incredulous about it and more just jumping in on the fun, because it was a bit weird that the notch is starting to show up in more places than a phone. That being said, I knew the notch was not going to be a huge problem, much like with the iPhones. It's one of those things that you just sort of accept is there, and it doesn't annoy you until it actually like really gets in the way of things. But for the most part, it doesn't. And the same thing goes for this notch, mainly because the menu bar is just rendering around it. So you're going to have some elements on the left and some elements on the right. There are some places where it might get a little bit weird, like if you go over to DaVinci Resolve and just come up here, obviously you have some elements that are on the left and it has to try to fit everything on the right. I don't know if this is going to end up being a nuisance for certain programs where they have many different items that it actually bleeds into the status bar over here, but so far this is the most egregious example that I have at the moment, and even then it's not that big of a deal. When you go full screen with pretty much any application, it'll just render right below the notch so that the menu bar will be up there even if it's hiding until you bring the mouse all the way up there. And the only time that I really felt a little bit of an annoyance was when I was trying to pick a wallpaper for my desktop. The menu bar will take on the color of the background that you choose, and because that notch is there and is always going to be black, sometimes it's a little bit jarring. So it's good that I have a go-to that matches pretty well with it. You know me, I like my Persona 5 Tokyo wallpaper. Now in these very early days, I do just have a few thoughts when it comes to certain aspects of the laptop. Magsafe is going to be nice, don't get me wrong, but I haven't used it yet because I happen to have Thunderbolt or USB-C charging docks in both of the places that I work the most, which is here in the office or at home. At home, I actually go into clamshell mode where I close the laptop, have it standing on the side, and I just connect my dock into the side. That way it gets connected to certain peripherals and my monitor at home. But the main display so far is really great. I know some of you out there might want something more than 14 inches so you have more screen real estate, but I think this is just about the sweet spot for somebody like me that might be on the go, on a plane, or anything like that. There's just enough room for me to comfortably edit even with a trackpad, which is not something I usually do. I like to use mice, but I just mentioned it, so let's talk a little bit about the work aspect of these MacBooks. Like a couple of my peers, they have said that these laptops are more or less tools. That is exactly what you're paying for, and I tend to agree. So you have to know exactly what you need, and for a lot of people out there who might just be making videos on YouTube and not really going too far into graphics or cinematography, the previous MacBooks are probably pretty good already for you. And with companies learning more and more about how to work these M1 processors, clearly some of the top tools are going to have even better support for them, like DaVinci Resolve with its recent update that gave it like 3 to 5 times more performance. That increase was basically based on ProRes, however, but what I did was I got one of my recent projects, my Pixel 6 Pro camera test, and I threw it onto the 14-inch MacBook to see how long it would take to render. No surprises really, like you saw in the previous clip, I was scrubbing through the timeline with 4K DCI footage really easily. That being said, I don't really use like crazy codecs or 10-bit video recording even. I keep things pretty simple, but I was still comfortably getting through everything, and then I hit render. On the laptop I was using previously, the Asus Zephyrus M16, which has the RTX 3070 in it, which helps greatly with H.265 rendering, I was able to get this render of the Pixel 6 Pro real-world camera test done in like about 8 minutes, and the MacBook Pro 14 was able to do it in about 9. So even if the render was a little bit longer, the big thing to remember is that the MacBook Pro 14 did all of that off a plug. It was all on battery power because you get the same amount of power plugged in or not. So clearly in this first like day or so, my first impressions are very good. I have a lot to look forward to when it comes to using this laptop, especially since travel is ramping up again, and I'll be able to get like full edits or full script writing done on a plane without having to worry about either the bulkiness of my laptop or the fact that it should be plugged in or not. With the MacBook Pros, you're clearly paying for tools, and I very much agree with that sentiment, and I want to echo it again here. So you can look at this laptop as a little bit of future-proofing for myself, but it's also a great go-to when I know I just want to have a laptop that can do everything on its own without the need for extra stuff. As long as I keep my peripherals more or less Bluetooth enabled, I don't really need any more dongles or anything like that. I mean, to be fair, accessories that worked really well for the MacBook Pro 13 can actually pretty much work well for the 14 as well. This Moft laptop carrying case is a great example. It just barely bleeds out of the side, but I'm still able to get it closed fairly comfortably. There we go. And it's a great carrying case for the laptop. So as more Apple products continue to be introduced into my life and content, you can look forward to more on the MacBook Pro 14 and beyond in the world of tech by subscribing to my channel. Get into the comment sections and let me know what you think of this laptop. Did you pick one up? And did you, what model did you get? And of course, drop some likes on this video so I know you want to hear more about this particular laptop. With all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and enjoy your tea, everybody.